Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the topic access modifiers in object-oriented programming. So what is access modifiers and why do we require it? So you know that the basis of of object-oriented programming is classes and then the objects, right? Classes basically have two things. One is basically the data members, and then it have the methods. Whenever you have to create any instance of a class, we create it by the using objects. We fill in this data with the information we have for that instance, and we can basically call the behavior on this classes using the methods, right? This is the entire setup of an object-oriented programming world. Now, normally, now tell me, suppose if you're creating any kind of real world simulation, right? So when we even have real world simulation, like for example, if it is a college, okay, so in college also we have different departments, right? We can have the HR department, right? We'll have a student council which takes queries and inquiries regarding student complaints and looks after students welfare. Then we also have might be a section which takes care about an examinations, like we can have an examination department which is responsible for making sure that the exams are held and the question paper is created and all that stuff, right? So we have different departments. Now all the different data for these different departments will be stored in different folders. Yes, we'll have different folders, or in other words, we'll have simple different offices for all these different departments, correct? So even in the software world, what we can do is whatever data which is similar, right, we'll put them together into one folder, right? Even in a normal day to day, when we use computers, we have different folders, right? Might be all the entertainment related thing we put into one folder. If you have any documents, you put it into some another folder and name it as documents, right? So in Java also, or not just in Java, but in any programming language also, you can have something similar to folders. In Java, we call this as packages. So package is nothing but simple is nothing. It's nothing but a folder where you will have a collection of similar classes, okay, which can be put together inside a package. It's just if I consider a class as a file, then a package is nothing but collection of files, which is nothing but a folder. Now, the role of an access modifier is to tell us key the data and the members of a class, who and how can you access it. It basically answers two questions: who can access the data of the class and the methods of the class, and how and where can I access it. Who and where can the data of this particular class, any class, right? It can be, let's call it as demo. So any class which you're talking about will have two things, right? So we need to understand who and how we can access the data of this class, correct? Obviously this data belongs to the demo class. That means the objects of the demo class will definitely access it. But now we have to consider, we will have not only have one class in the in your software, in the program which you are creating, an application which you are creating, you will have more than one classes, right? Now if it's an application which is simulating the real world, so obviously you can have different packages, and every package will have a collection of classes. So we have to now consider, like suppose if I have a package 1, let's say package 2, package 3, each one of them have some classes, right? Now let's say whatever data is, let's say we have a class A has some data D1 and D2, class B has some data, let's say D1 and D2 and D3, okay? Then we have class C has some data and so on, right? So we have to understand this class B, okay, does it have only access to D1, D2, D3, or can I access A if it belongs to the same package? So all these different access which we can provide to our data and methods is given, those rules are given by our access modifiers. So we basically have, when it comes to Java, we basically have 4 different kind of access modifiers. The first one is public, right? Second is default. Third is private. And the fourth one is protected. Let's talk about each one of them. Okay, let's understand. Let's also talk about the interview questions which we get based on these access modifiers, and then we'll go to the IntelliJ and look at the sample code, right? So public, anything, I mean any kind of a class, or when I'm talking about access modifiers, I usually use the word entity. When I mean entity, I'm talking about data, methods, and classes, right? So any entity which is marked as public, okay, any entity which is marked as public will be accessible across the application. Okay, so this access, anything which is marked as public, has access across the application. Across the application means, suppose if I have an application, let's call it as a demo application, right? Now inside this demo, I can have different packages, package 1, package 2, and might be one more, package 3. Okay, I'm talking specifically for Java language. Every package will have classes inside it, right? So might be P1 has some 3 classes, this has 5 classes, and let's say these are 10 classes, right? So suppose if any of the data inside a class, suppose here there is a class, let's call one of the classes class, let's say A, right? And if I make this class as public, right? Suppose if this class is made public, so what is going to happen is that this A class can be accessed across the application. That means I will be able to access A from package 3, from package 1, and in package 2, obviously. Similarly, suppose if here I make any data, let's instead of making this as public, what if I make data like this, public, let's say integer x. So some data variable x which belongs to the class A, I have made it as public. Now this integer x, this data, because it is public, is now accessible through all the different packages. That means throughout the entire application, which is demo application, you can access this public data. So same thing will go for the methods as well, right? So that's why the word public, right? It's accessible to everyone which is present in the application. Now, what about default? Default is an access modifier, okay, which means whenever you set any entity as default, only the entities, that means only the classes or the objects which are inside that package, they will have the access, right? It across the application, every entity inside the application can access public entity. If it is something called as default, if it is default, this can be accessed only within the package. Only within the package it can be accessed. Now, how do I say a particular entity has a default access? You actually, whenever you mean that you want to give a default access to an entity, you simply do not add a access modifier. Meaning, if you see simple like this, class demo, right? And I have here public integer x. Okay, let's say one more variable, string name. So there's a class demo. Okay, as you can see, there is no access modifier present here. Because there is no access modifier present, by default, the access modifier which will be applicable on this demo class will be of type default. That means this class will be accessed only within the package in which it is defined. That is one thing. On the data member level, if you see string name, there is no access modifier which has been declared. If there is no access modifier declared, then what happens is Java is going to assume the access modifier for this name data member is of type default. That means this can be accessed anywhere within the package it is included in, right? Suppose this class belongs to the package P1. So all the entities which are present in the package P1 can access the class and can also access the name because it is of type default. All right. So this is what default means. Now let's talk about the third and the fourth one, which is protected and private. So let's talk about private. Private is the most restrictive access modifier, meaning if you make any kind of data member or methods private, the access of that entity is only available in the class in which it is defined. That means if I make any, suppose I have a class again, demo class, right? If I make private integer x, right? And I say integer a, all right? Now, this private data member x is accessible to every entity or every methods and data members which belong to the class demo, right? So x can be accessed only within the class. You can only access it within the class. You cannot access it outside the class, right? That means if you try, let's say you have another class here, let's say class, let's say test. Okay. Now, if I create an object of demo, when I say demo, d equal to new demo, and let's assume that both these classes also belong to the same package P1. Now, using object, I can say d.a. This is okay, right? But if you try to access d.x, it will not allow you to access d.x. The reason being, because it is private, you cannot access it in another class. You cannot access it in another class. But yes, you can access, if you want to access this private variables, then how should you access them? Because if it's a data member, you would want to set the value of the variable. You would also want to retrieve the value of the variable. In that case, if it's a private member, we try to write getters and setters. Getters and setters are nothing but simple methods. So if I have to get the value, that means retrieve the value, I can simply write int get x, right? And simply return the value of x. Now this is allowed because this method is part of what class? Demo class. Within the class, I have access to this private variable, correct? Now similarly, I'll also have to write a setter method because I will also want to might be set the value of x. So I'm going to say set x, might be pass in a value integer, let's say AB, and I can simply say x equal to AB. So this value is given to it. So this is a getter method, this is a setter method, right? Now usually all the data members of a class, the basic thing which we follow in object oriented programming is that we make always all the data members, okay, all the data members are usually made private. These data members are made private because according to the object oriented programming principle, you should not expose your data directly to the to the utilities which are going to use this class, right? You should never expose your data. Always allow the access to the data only via the methods, right? There are two reasons for it. One reason is there is the concept of abstraction. You do not really, the concept of encapsulation, right? You do not really want to show the world how your data is being stored at the behind, all right? You just have to give the user the access to data whenever they want it via methods. This is going to allow us to avoid unnecessary manipulations of the data, right? Imagine if I had not made it private, okay, and had even given it a default, suppose access, all the classes which belong to the same package P1 can access this particular data integer x via the objects, yes, and might be they could set and read the values of x. Might be we cannot set any level of privacy to the data, right? Data privacy is a main thing. We do not want to do that, right? We want to protect our data. That is one thing. Second thing is you want to really abstract out all the implementation details of the class. We do not want to show the world how are we actually implementing behind the scenes, right? So for both the reasons, we are always going to make our data members private. And once you make the data members private, you cannot really access it outside the class. That's why you should have a getter and setter to retrieve or set the value of x. Another important advantage which private access modifier gives you is that because you can only set the value via a method, right? You can add any kind of validations you want to add before setting the value. This is going to allow us to make sure that the incorrect data manipulation does not happen. Might be you want that the value of x is always a positive number, which might be greater than 0. You do not want the value to be ever 0. So when you are setting the value, you can simply write an if condition. If the condition with the data which is being trying to set, right, if it is validated, if it's a correct form of the data, then only you go ahead and store that data into your integer x. Otherwise you do not send. You can send in simply or give a message back to the user saying that the data is incorrect, right? So you can also set up validations by doing so. So there are many advantages of making your data members private. In fact, the principle is usually you should always, it's a good practice to always make your data members private. Having said that, that doesn't mean you cannot make your methods private. Obviously, you can make your methods private, but then think about this. I mean, making methods private is not going to help us because then you will not be able to access those methods outside the class, right? Might be you have a scenario where you want some functionality which need not be accessed outside the class and it only needs to be accessed via the other members of that class itself. If that is what your requirement is, then definitely you can go ahead and make your methods as well as private, right? But the usual use cases, we use private with the data members of every class. So this is private. So private is the most restrictive access modifier because it restricts the access only to the class in which it is created. So this is your private. So far we spoke about three: private, default, and public. The last one is protected. To understand protected, you should understand the concept of inheritance, right? So what is inheritance? Now in real life, you know what inheritance is, right? Suppose if your parents, right, have any kind of, let's say they have a house, right? So what they usually do is they are going to, after they would write a will and say that after them, this property belongs to their children, right? Which is you, maybe you and brother, you and sister, right? They might, just equally divide the property among their children. What is it? You are inheriting the property from your parents, right? So that is a concept of inheritance. The same concept of inheritance is actually used in object oriented programming as well, right? So where how we use it is, suppose if I have a class, suppose say car, right? Now car can be of different types. Yes, I can have, might be, let's make it like this. I have a vehicle, okay, all right, and I can say car can be a vehicle. Yes, I can say bike can be a vehicle, right? Might be I can also say aeroplane is also a vehicle, right? So this part, right, what is this? I can, if I have to model this relationship into my program, I could say this is my parent class, right? And what are these? These are the specialization. See, every car is a vehicle, correct? But every vehicle is not a car, right? So these are what specializations of this main parent. So these are like what? Child classes. When you have a relationship like this, right, when a generalized concept can be broken down into two or more specialized concept, you can have a concept of inheritance here, right? So if when you have something like this, you actually can model this relation using an inheritance part. Now when you have inheritance in class, in Java, how does it work? Suppose let's say I have class vehicle, right? Let me have some properties of class vehicle, right? Let's say we can say string name. That is the name of the vehicle we are trying to use, right? Let's create another class car, right? And let's say extends, oh, I don't have space here. I'm going to say class car extends vehicle. So in Java, we use the keyword extends to tell us that this particular class is a child of the parent class vehicle. This extend keyword is actually going to enforce the relationship of inheritance, meaning vehicle class will be the parent class and car class will be the child class, right? Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? So when you have some relationship like this, right, usually what happens is whatever is present in your parent class, whatever is present in your parent class, all those data members, all those methods can be accessed by whom? Can be accessed by the child class. That means this name can be accessed inside the car class because what? This name belongs to the parent vehicle, right? So this is the concept actually of inheritance, and this is how when you create classes, when all the child class have access to all the members of the parent class, right? So this is what it is. Now what if you have created, now let's understand where does this protected access modifier come into picture, right? Let's say you created a class, okay, you do not know, you just started off and created, let's call this class as might be a bank. All right, you created a class, you have some data here. So let's create simple thing. We have a string bank name, okay, and then you can have address and so on, like you can have a lot of data here, right? Now you do not know right now at this stage what children's you bank is going to have, right? But you can be sure of that if this class ever has any child classes, or if any other class was supposed to inherit the bank, you would want this particular data, this bank name, okay, you want this bank name to be accessed by all of its children. You want it to be accessed to all of its children. That means I do not want to make it public, because if I make it public, everybody will have access to it, but you do not want that. Might be you just want the bank name to be accessed by only the children or the child classes of bank. If that is your requirement, right, if that is your requirement, I will have to use the access modifier protected. Okay, now someone would say, why could I then use default? The reason is, suppose if this bank was declared in package P1, right? It is possible that the child of this bank one child can be present inside package P1. You can have another child can be present in package, P2 you have another child, say C2, you can have another child in another package and so on, right? What you want, if you make it default, only all the classes which are present inside the P1 will have access to it. Even those classes which are not, child of bank, they'll also have access to what? Your bank name, right? But what is our requirement? We want only the child classes of the class bank to have access of the bank name. In that case, no matter whether the child is present in the same package or different package, if it is a child of the bank class, you want bank name to be accessible. In that case, you can make this as what? Protected. So whenever you make certain data as protected, what is going to happen is it can be accessed by the child classes. So this is about protected. Okay. All right. So there are certain things which we need to understand when it comes from interview perspective, right? Let's try to understand the difference between public and default. Public is nothing but whenever you make anything public, it has been accessible across the application. Default, on the other hand, it acts like public but within a same package in which it is declared. Now, what is the difference between default and protected then? Protected acts actually like default. Please pay attention. Protected actually acts like default when it is in same package. Meaning that suppose if I have a package P1, right? I have a class A, class B and class C which are part of P1. Let's say P2 is another package which has class D. Okay, and let's say NE. Let's say B is a child of A. Okay, and D is a child of A. There is some inside A, there is some member, let's call it as X, which is of type protected access. Okay, because this is a protected access, this X data will be accessible obviously by class A. Yes. Will it be accessible by class B? Yes, because obviously B is a child of A. But because this X, okay, is defined inside package P1, all the other classes which are not actually child of A will also have access to what? The variable X. So this actually protected kind of works like default for all the classes which is inside the package in which it is defined. Then when is the difference? The difference is like, look at this package P2 which has a child of A, right? If I had to make it default, the D class would never have access to the X because it is in a different package, right? But because if it's in a different package and it is a child of class A, if you still wanted to access, then you should make it protected. So protect, because this is protected now and D is actually a child of A, this variable X can be accessed from here, right? Can E have access to the variable X? No, E will not have any access to variable X because E is not a child of A, and again second reason is it does not belong to package P1. So the protected actually works like default within the same package. So sometimes they do ask you the difference between the two. Next, the last one is private. Private is the most restrictive access modifier you can ever have. In whatever class you define anything as private, only the members of that class will have access to the private data members or private methods. Okay, I hope this helps.